I hope you have already seen the first video in this series. It tries to convey the big picture of what many Christians believe using a three-dimensional animated graphical model. This second video looks at a few aspects in more detail and suggests some modern analogies which might help us understand a little of the mysterious depths of God and his love for creation and us in particular. If you think in pictures and remember some school maths and science, you may find these analogies thought-provoking. There is only one God, living, loving, perfect, infinite beyond all other infinities. However, based on the teaching of Jesus, the early church gradually came to understand God best as a trinity, that is, as three aspects of personality, or indeed as three persons within the one God. The traditional names of the three persons are Father, Son and Spirit. The Spirit or breath of God is that aspect of God which interacts with creation and with we humans in particular. The Trinity concept is deeply mysterious and puzzling. How might we picture it? God is love personified. It is the very nature of love to be directed outwards to another person who reflects that love back. We might imagine then that God, being love, implies an interaction within the single being of God in which there is continual giving and receiving of love. No diagram can depict God himself, but we might imagine how the inner surface of heaven, which cradles the universe in our diagram, might quiver as the waves of love, joy and mutual delight pass amongst the three persons of the Trinity. This animation shows two pulses moving on the surface of a sphere and a third pulse moving across the equatorial plane. The equatorial pulse would correspond to the waves that the Spirit makes across the whole interface with the created universe. The other two pulses can be likened to the vibrations flowing between Father and Son. Note that these two pulses swap places, so you can hardly tell one from the other. Now replace the sphere with the blue inner surface of heaven in the model, and you may have some glimpse of the vibrating, creative, loving energy of the one God in three persons. The Christian creed emphasises the equality of the three persons. They differ only insofar as we comprehend their actions in our world. Here are two analogies from school maths which might help us picture this equivalence. Here are three fractions. They correspond, say, to cutting a pizza in 2, 3 or 5 segments. The fractions look different, but we can cancel the numerator and denominator and simplify each to equal 1. In a similar way, Father, Son and Spirit are equivalent appearances of the one God. For the second maths analogy, look at these three sequences of numbers. They look very different, but a little probing shows that they have essentially the same structure. For instance, 2 plus 3 equals 5, and 100 with 2 noughts, times 1,000 with 3 noughts equals 100,000 with 5 noughts. Also, a quarter times an eighth is 1/32. Every number in each sequence corresponds precisely with the numbers at the same position in the other two sequences. The three sequences all have the same underlying form. By analogy, the three persons of God are three faces of the same underlying God. I'm going to push this illustration further. The whole numbers are understood even by children, but they point to how the powers of 10 rapidly expand towards infinity in the second sequence. By analogy, Jesus, our Son, explained to ordinary people what the Father is like. Also, the converging sequence of fractions reminds us that the Spirit reaches into finer and ever finer details of the universe. Let us turn now to analogies for our human condition. The Bible states that in the beginning God created man in his own image. Also, St. Paul describes Jesus as the image of the invisible God. How might we picture these things? The word image is widely used in science to refer to the appearance of an object being projected onto a screen. Perhaps the simplest image is a shadow. Here is a figure of a man standing in front of a lamp which is casting his shadow on the wall. If all we can see is the shadow but not the man, we would still recognise it as a man and see that he is standing up and turning round. But we couldn't tell much more about him than that. In a similar way, we humans are like the shadow cast by God on the wall of creation. The qualities which we have, such as life, intelligence, creativity, love, a sense of justice, all genuinely come from God, but they are a very restricted projection. In technical terms, we would say that much information has been lost. This contrasts with Jesus. As understood by Christians, Jesus was a much more realistic, information-rich projection of God into our world. In this illustration, I have likened Jesus to a cinema or TV screen on the wall, showing us what is really going on with God. After his resurrection from the dead, Jesus had a body which seems to straddle both the material and spiritual worlds, and so was even closer to being an image of God than Jesus was before he died. What analogy would you suggest? Now we must deal with the melancholy subject of death. The hope of Christians is that they will eventually rise again from the dead, as Jesus once did, and live forever in the presence of God. To people who do not believe in God, this is just foolish, deluded, wishful thinking. So how can we make sense of it? Here is an analogy with your home computer. Suppose you have been writing your autobiography on an old desktop PC. The text is full of typing mistakes and factual errors. At regular intervals, you save what you have written to the hard drive and also make a backup copy onto a USB memory stick. Then one day your hard drive develops a serious hardware fault and crashes terminally. All the files on that disk are lost, but fortunately you still have the backup. You take the broken computer to the repair centre and are assured that there is no need to replace the whole computer. A new hard drive can be installed, and at the same time you can have a major upgrade, adding more memory, better sound and graphics cards, replacing the monitor and upgrading the operating system. Great, it runs beautifully, like a brand new computer. Now you can import your biography from the memory stick. However, before you can continue writing your story, the text so far has to be proofread by someone who knows you very well, all too well, and all the factual and other errors corrected. Once that has been done, you can happily and confidently continue your writing. Let me explain. The biography corresponds with your life's thoughts, words and actions, and the hard disk is your body. The memory stick corresponds with your enduring personality, which is held in an inert state in the purple zone of death in the diagram after you've died. The computer upgrade is God's remade creation, into which your whole personality will be copied. The proofreading and error correction is done by the Son person of the Trinity as an amazing gesture of goodwill. Christians identify the Son with Jesus of Nazareth. Closely related to death and resurrection is the disconcerting matter of judgment. There's no getting away from it. The Creed plainly states that Jesus will come again to judge all people. This has been the most frightening aspect of Christian teaching for centuries. However, it is plausible that many resurrected people will judge themselves as much as Christ will judge them. You see, the resurrected Jesus is the standard against which we will be compared. People who have rejected the God-compatible aspects of their natures and built personalities which are so tightly bound to themselves that they cannot respond to God's promptings, they are not going to choose to go anywhere near God's presence. At the end of time, they will probably just take themselves off in the opposite direction as they did in life and hide among the dead, the purple zone in the diagrams. But the space of the dead has no future, no love, no hope, no joy, no anything, only eternal non-existence. God respects free will and will not force anyone to come into his new creation. It is perhaps the defining characteristic of Christianity that every person who in this life turns towards Jesus and meets him in their mind's eye will be forgiven all their wrongs and made straight and true before God. It is a mystery of love for which every Christian is eternally grateful. In closing, let us look again at the big picture model and marvel at the symmetry in the Christian story. Symmetry is a deeply embedded feature of nature. Jesus is the central point of symmetry, reflecting the world which was created at the beginning of time into the world made anew at the end of time. The presence of God covers the entire span, with Jesus' life, death and resurrection at its apex. As the book of Revelation puts it, Jesus is the first and the last, the beginning and the end. In the third and final presentation in this set, we will look at the interaction of God with his creation.